I'm John Salopes. This is a router table cabinet that I made. I made this router table cabinet faster, stronger, and simpler with this, the K2000 Kreg jig. Now, the reason I like a router table is for safety purposes, because of the height and because of the fact that I can bring a small piece of wood to a heavy router as opposed to a heavy router to a small piece of wood. The other part about this is dust collection. Dust collection is very important, especially from not only the top portion, but underneath the router as well. As dusty as everything becomes and sends airborne into your shop, it's best to keep it confined and keep your shop dust-free. The idea here is, and the concept is, keep the cabinet inside smaller and also draw from the bottom, and in this case I can also draw from the top, because once the vacuum system goes on, this whole cabinet becomes the dust control or the dust extraction for the entire unit. By having this door closed, dust stays in there, and it now gives me a lot of extra space to make dust-free drawers here that will house my bits so that I have easy access to them, and they're right here where the table is as well. Now, for the next step is add in some drawers. And again, this is going to add weight to this unit, because the more weight you add to the unit, the more stable it becomes as well. Here at the bottom, I've put in 2 drawers, but you could put in 2 cabinet doors to open up side by side and have that a full cavity to store things that may not necessarily relate to the router table, but may have things close by that could actually be put in there for storage. Now for the wheels, well, I finally found a set of wheels that are really good here, because these wheels, not only when they're locked, don't turn, but they also don't pivot, which is important for a router table or important for any tool that you have in the shop so it doesn't move around. The nice part about it, again, is weight. You want as much weight as possible, because once those wheels are locked in position, the table is not going to move. As far as coming up with the concept and design and plan of the table, what I've done was I've taken some dimensions, some standard dimensions here. And let's build a box here. So we've built the box, comes like so. That's our cabinet. There's our cavity. Here's our 2 drawers for our bits. And whether it's a shelf or whether it's a cupboard door, there's our base. Now, to determine the height, and again, 36 inches, that's a standard kitchen top height. As far as the top goes, well, this one here is 1 1/8 inch thick, which is a standard thickness for most tops as well. Now, we're looking at top sizes. 24 by 32 is most common, and I would recommend that you buy one and not build one, because by the time you come up with all this, put your router in position as well, you're going to find that you're spending more time doing that, and it will be a lot easier for you to buy a top as well. Now, the next thing I want to come in is I want to put my wheels in here. Now, in this case, my wheels are 5 inches, and that's a good height to have, because it's, again, a 4-inch wheel, but by the time all the metal framing is on there, it gives you that height. With 1 1/8 on top, that gives me a 6 1/8. Taken away from 36, well, that's going to give me 29 7/8, and I don't want to work with that fraction. So I make this distance from the cabinet to under the table to the top of the wheels 30 inches. And that 1/8 of an inch is not going to make that much of a difference. So let's take this plan and get started on the cabinet. As far as starting off, we've cut the bottom first. Now the bottom is 26 inches wide, 21 1/4 inches deep, because our tabletop is 24 inches in depth, so we want to make sure that we're at least in 1 inch from both ends. The other thing that I do then is I pre-cut the first shelf that goes above. And with cutting that shelf, I want to make that 21 1/4 deep as well, but only 24 1/2 inches wide. And the reason in this case now is that I'm going to add that on and use it as a jig. With all the pieces cut to size, I start off with the base first. Now what I do is I measure in and drill my holes now for the wheel plate. And the advantage of that is, if you start putting the secondary shelf on, you're going to have to go with a 45-degree or a 90-degree angle drill, and you don't want to do that. You want to be able to get at it now, so it's easier to position it, mark it, and then also drill the holes. The other nice part is, and the part that you want to do here is, before putting all the pieces together, make sure you measure in far enough. Remember that front cabinet drawer has to go in there, so you want to make sure you've got at least 3/4 of an inch space. So give yourself about 1 1/4 to 1 1/2 inches so that face of the drawer can go in and clear those tops of those carriage bolts that are going to go in here. First gable goes up on this side. And I'm just dry fitting it right now because I am going to put pocket hole screws in here on the inside, and you'll never see those because once the drawer goes in place, they're going to be hidden. Now there they are. Those are the 5 holes I'm going to use. And again, you don't need a lot here because by the time we put a little bit of glue on here and those 5 pocket holes, that's going to be a really strong joint. Now, line this all up. This is where I'm going to start to use these clamps. Take a bit of glue, and I'm just going to run a light bead down here. Not really heavy. 1 light bead all the way down. And just give it a quick little wipe like this, just to spread it out evenly. Save that for the next piece you're going to be using, because you will use it again. Set this up in place. Make sure there's no sawdust in there. Press that into it. Line up the front. Next step, take my pocket holes, and where the clamps are, put them in position. That just helps it from pushing it backwards, and it keeps pushing it out, and it keeps it nice and tight to that center shelf. So when this center shelf is brought up into position, it's going to give us a nice square box. Now those are my screws in place. With that glue, this will set up in no time at all. Strength. Take the shelf out now, and this is the top of the shelf. So I want to put pocket holes here as well. I'm going to start off in the middle again, and work either way. So halfway down, and about 1 inch away from the edge again. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to bring this up 14.5 inches. So instead of trying to balance that, what I've done is just out of some scrap, created some spacers. And those spacers, 14.5 exactly. And what I do is I put one in each corner, just like this. Taking a clamp just to secure it. Got a few extra little clamps here. Just a spring-loaded clamp on there just to secure it in place, like so. So what I want to do now is I want to add glue onto these pieces, but I want to make sure that I don't want to run glue all the way down the sides. So I take a spreader clamp and just set that in place like so, and just spread the walls of this just ever so slightly, just so I can get that piece in. Bring this up like so, and I'm going to make that my front corner. Bring it in, and slowly set it in place. Again, we don't want to run it down this whole side, so that gives us a really nice finish. Just cutting out one little corner there, which is fine. Take that off and line up the front portion, line up the side, and that's my top portion here. The next thing I want to use is my right angle clamps. Now these are really nicely designed to actually fit into the pocket hole itself, and you clamp it in place, hold it flush at the front, and hold it together. This, remember, with the glue, once you put the screws in and that glue starts setting up, you are going to have a really tight joint here. So you want to make sure that you've got a nice hold there and hold it in position. One on either end keeps it nice and straight and allows me now then to put in my pieces here. Just check underneath quickly, make sure it's all touching all those corners. Screw in there. Here. And here. Now, just because this glue sets up in 20 minutes, well, it sounds like it's a fast time to dry, but when you think about it, if I have to sit here and wait for this clamp to hold this on for 20 minutes, I wouldn't be able to keep moving like I am here now. And by being able to clamp those in position, put the pocket holes in, and put the pocket screws through, it just lets me now keep going and building the project. Now the next step here is to do the same process on the other side, and to use the clamps again. Now if you notice, this fits into that pocket hole, and this side here is able to pivot so it actually goes into place and holds it where you want it to. Coming around to this side now, again, just slip it in and clamp it into place. The next thing I want to do is I want to take my compass and I want to draw a 4-inch hole there. So I've made this one up, take it in place, measure it out 2 inches, set the center point there, and just give it a little bit of a push so it locks in, and follow that through, and that's going to be the hole that I want to cut out. Now, in order to set that up as well, bring this back and bring this into just 5.5 inches, which should be just enough and will be enough to find that center point there as well. Coming out from the inside, 10 inches there, and 10 inches here. I'm just going to move that over just a slight bit. Take my square edge here, my 90-degree angle, and just line it up so that it's in place like so. This is just a rough lineup right now because what's going to happen is we're going to cut that out, and once we do cut that out with the jigsaw, we're going to go back underneath and we're going to realign this to make sure it's exactly where it has to be. By using a 3/8-inch Forstner bit, I create a hole just back from the line so that I can set my blade in for my jigsaw and do a nice clean cut and follow around on the inside of that pencil line so the pencil line is left and exposed. The next step, once that piece falls out, is just sand with a small drum sander, clean up that profile so that you have a nice smooth area, and then take your router and follow it through with a router with a 1/4-inch round over bit just to give it a rounded edge so there's no sharp edges to inhibit or just to block the dust from falling in that hole. The next step is to set the interior gables in. Now, these are the spacers I'm going to use, but these are actually the size of the cavity of the hole. And if you set them in place, I'm going to take this first piece here and just show you off of this side. What I want to do is if I want to put this piece in place, I set this up and measure the height. And now this is 21 1/4 inches deep, and it comes flush to the top. And in this case, it's 14 inches and a 1/16 of an inch, just so that it keeps consistent with the level. Best way to measure that up is after you've cut that length. If you find that it's still a little proud, take it back to the table saw and just take that little bit off. By using this spacer, which is now going to be actually the top, I'm just going to drop that down and use it as a jig so that I get the exact measurement at the bottom, and when this is transferred to the top, you'll have a nice square box in the whole finished process. Set this in place, and what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the good side of both these finishes because you will see these. And this is now that cavity, that box, which is actually the whole dust collection system itself. I'll first put 5 holes on the outside here because you're not going to see these because they will be covered up by that flared angle which draws the dust and the wood shavings down into the hole.